I'm Joakim Seiler. If there are any new participants in this webinar, I will present myself shortly. Joakim Seiler, head gardener at Gunnebo House in Sweden, and also partly a teacher at the University of Gothenburg. And I will present historic box alternatives and historic management of low hedges, mainly edging box. A short presentation with looking into the historical sources. And so I work at Gunnebo House, and it's kind of nice to compare the large garden Hetlo with the small garden Gunnebo. So at Hetlo they have 27 kilometers of box, and at Gunnebo we have 126 meters, and this is it gives you other options. So you can, it's when you have a small garden, it's possible to do experiments with craft methods. And I think that would be really hard if you have 27 kilometers to prune or clip. So there are advantages with a small garden, I think. And so yeah, looking into the historical sources, they indicate that box was introduced in Sweden at Vramsgunnarstorp in the 1630s or 40s, and by André Mollet to the Royal Garden in Stockholm in the 1650s. 2 or 3 types of box are recorded in the sources in Sweden. The small, they speak of the small box, the large box, and the gilded box. And planting is suggested to be done in May by most authors. Clipping should be done in May or around midsummer. And clipping could be done with a hedge shear or with a thumb and the index finger, as described by Fjäderhane in the 20th century. That's really, it's true. They suggest that in the 20th century, they made time measurements. We might come back to that later on. In my craft research, different hedge shears have been tested. Different models like the broad-bladed European ones and narrow-bladed Japanese models, and also different sizes have been used. Questions about ergonomics, the soundscape, the visitor experience, the need for skill, and the quality of the results have been investigated. And I will not have time to report on all that, but I'll just, oh, sorry about that. Now I switched too quickly. Sorry about that. We have also run a comparative test for several years with a battery-powered head shear and manual head shears at Gunnebo. So we are into investigating the craft and making craft experiments. And as you can see in those images right now, the result from the manual head shear were more life in the lines and less technical perfection than the battery-powered tool. The quality of the result was more linked to personal skill than with the power tool that provided more support for high quality. So it was, of course, you need skill with the power tool as well, but because we don't use a string and we don't use railing to support the lines, it's still a question of personal skill, but it's easier to get a high quality with a power tool than with the manual tool. The work with the manual head shears resulted in using the body in a more dynamic way, whereas the work with the power tool was more static, as I reported also about with the pruning hook and the hedge slasher versus the power tools on the high hedges. As we can see in the images, the overall result from the power tool was very precise, but on a detailed level, as seen on the images in the middle, the cuts were more damaged. And this can have to do with this specific machine as well. This is kind of an extreme example showing very damaged leaves. So if you have a good machine with a really sharp blade, it shouldn't look like that, but it's rarely as sharp as the manual head shear. When looking in the historical sources for box alternatives, the following was found. André Mollet in the mid 17th century recommends using lingonberry, Vaccinium viticida, instead of box. And this is for the Nordic climate, for the Nordic situation, and because of hardiness. And lingonberry was used also in Russia at Peterhof and Tsarskoye Selo, two famous gardens outside St. Petersburg in Russia, and have been used in the reconstruction of the summer garden in St. Petersburg, as seen in this image. So you see, this is a historical option as a historical alternative to box in a very cold climate, lingonberry. Another description is kind of nice. It's Christian Gartner in Norway, in Trondheim, quite far north. He recommends grass or chives instead of box, and this is in the late 17th century. One early Swedish source that presents some edging materials is that of Rosenhane, Schering Rosenhane, in the mid-17th century, who points out oak planks, boxwood, lavender, thyme, common rue, and sage as different edging solutions for flower beds. Modern alternatives for box are presented by the other speakers today, as we have already heard. My question from the cultural heritage perspective is, would it be an idea to use the historical sources to find box alternatives for historic gardens instead of only using modern alternatives? Maybe we should look at the historical sources and do more experiments with the recommended alternatives in the historical sources, as on this image here. Several Swedish authors, such as Schering Rosenhane, Johan Arlich, and Petter Lundberg, write about the use of Norway spruce, Picea abies, as a good choice for solitary trees and especially for pyramids in topiary. Brockman, another author, also recommends using native plant material such as juniper, Juniperus communis, instead of the foreign and expensive yew, Taxus baccata. He writes that it is both beautiful and hardy. Petter Lundberg, which is a famous Swedish gardener from the 18th century, provides a thorough description of the Norway spruce, Picea abies. One should look for nice plants in the forest and start to clip them there around midsummer for some years. When they had got their intended shape through clipping, one could move them into the garden in the winter when the ground and the root ball was frozen. They needed to be carefully placed in relation to each other with their topiary forms corresponding. To be successful with the Norway spruce, Lundberg argues that planting with a root ball and not bare-rooted plants is crucial. Norway spruce have been a very common and popular plant throughout history in Sweden until today, both for hedges and for topiary in private and public gardens. Now Norway spruce is becoming more rare in favor of hornbeam, beech, or privet and other plants. Some of the findings in historical sources in my research was in the Swedish sources was that box seems to have been clipped lower and thinner in historical gardens than we do today. One measurement that is mentioned is 3 inches high and 3 inches wide, approximately 7.6 centimeters. So the hedges were really small. And box seems to have been seen as a plant that needed transplanting often. Johan Alisch describes that it could be working nicely for as much as 6 years before it needed transplanting. At the same time, there are other sources like Linnaeus, who describes the 100-year-old and very large box hedges at Ramsgunnarstorp in southern Sweden. Box was also could be clipped with a sickle, as reported by Clemens Alexander Wimmer, and box could be clipped through pinching with the thumb and the index finger. And it could also, of course, be clipped with head shears. That is reported in some sources like Johan Alisch. When we have looked for alternatives for box in historic gardens because of box blight, we have looked at modern alternatives and not the ones described in the historical sources. So here I see an option to do some more experiments in historic gardens with the historical alternatives. Now we will move to Italy. This image shows the parterre at Castello Ruspoli in Italy. And as I will repeat just a short description from Clemens Alexander Wimmer that I gave this morning. The German garden historian Clemens Alexander Wimmer states that hedges were introduced in the Renaissance garden and were mainly managed with sickles. And when the pleasure garden developed with elaborate hedge ornaments and topiary, the need for hedge shears occurred. According to Wimmer, the garden author Peter Laurenberg introduced the hedge shear in Germany in 1631. And in Sweden, the first record of hedge shears is by Åke Roland in 1690. At this garden, Castello Ruspoli, the head gardener Santino still practiced the craft of clipping box with the sickle, as if the head shears were not yet invented. We went to learn from him with a group of people, gardeners and translators and organizers, and as you see in this image, filmmakers, to document and learn from him. And I will try to show a short film, a short glimpse from that visit.
Poi sopra.
Jag tror du måste ha mycket mera go liksom.
Ja, Katarina behöver lite hjälp här om man gör på över, så tänkte kanske få en liten instruktion.
Kan han visa hur man står på ovansidan?
Santino, gli fai vedere come fai la superficie questa? Piatta?
Questa?
Con il falcetto? Sì.
Questo era un... C'ha ragione,
Che cosa?
Taglia
Non
poco.
va bene?
Taglia
Den
poco.
klipper inte bra.
Den var dålig.
Det skulle förklara.
Så. Qual è la, quindi,
Era un'altra che
quindi
andava
qual è
bene.
la
la luz.
quindi qual è la tecnica? Vai praticamente
Basta bussa forte.
Forte?
Forte.
Grattis.
Ja, så man måste
Ser också att han står lite snett.
slå liksom.
Han står inte så nära häcken och står liksom så att han står längs med häcken med benen. Så man inte slår på sig själv.
Man kan vända den båda till en
Ja, det var
andra
intressant.
hållet.
Si può girare quindi Santino la falcetta? Si può girare? Man kan vända.
La usi come vuoi.
So that was a short glimpse from our visit to Italy to document and learn this traditional craft. And I hope you survived looking at this, Chris. It must have been hard to see one clipping box like that.
I was just about to say it's very difficult how you would explain that level of clipping technique to the general public when they're used to seeing such precision hedges, but it's just a different way of doing it.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was all for me for this presentation.